Hi, everyone. I'm Chanel Call in for Vladimir Duthier. We're coming to you live this hour from the East Coast, tracking stories from across the country and around the world right now. The big story we're following, the mid-air collision outside of Washington, D.C. Search and recovery efforts resumed this morning to find the missing victims. The National Transportation Safety Board says it has now found key clues in its investigation. The plane with 64 people on board collided with an Army helicopter carrying 3 soldiers early Wednesday. First responders have now recovered at least 40 bodies. Officials say they believe no one survived the accident. Divers were able to recover the plane's black boxes, and the NTSB is now analyzing them. CBS News senior transportation correspondent Chris Van Cleve joins us now from Washington with more on this story. Chris, the NTSB says they found those black boxes now. So what kind of data may investigators be able to retrieve?
Well, there is a voice recorder and a data recorder. The data recorder records thousands of pieces of data about how the airplane was operating during that flight, leading up to this mid-air collision. So it will give investigators a host of data points as to what was going on mechanically with the airplane, how it was operating, the speed it was traveling, the height, the altitude. That's going to be an important point. So they should get almost a literal mountain of data out of that data recorder that they will need to analyze to thoroughly understand, even if they may start getting some initial data from that right away. The voice recorder, well, that has to be transcribed. There's a very laborious process that goes into how they transcribe and read out that voice recorder. That will take some time before investigators have a final transcript there. But that should document the conversation inside the cockpit. What were the pilots talking about? What were they seeing? Were they aware of this helicopter? What was going on in those final moments?
And Chris, Reagan National Airport is now, we know, one of 3 capacity-constrained airports in the country. How may that have played a role in this crash?
Well, it may or may not have. And that's certainly something investigators will look at here, is just the volume of traffic coming in and out of Washington Reagan Airport. Basically, capacity controlled or slot controlled means the FAA has determined that a certain number of flights can take off and land from this airport a day. That's capacity. They only allow that many flights. They're pre-assigned to the airlines. The airlines own those slots, and they operate them. So it may or may not be significant here, but Reagan is one of those handful of airports where the FAA has said this is what capacity is and you can't go over it.
There's also been, Chris, a lot of talk about staffing levels at the air traffic control tower. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I think what's raising some eyebrows is this report that staffing was, quote, not normal in the Washington Reagan Tower at the time of this incident. That does not mean that there weren't people in it. There were. Sources tell us that the staffing level was deemed adequate. In fact, if staffing drops below a certain point, it activates a trigger, which is the word the FAA uses, a trigger that could, for example, impact the number of planes coming and going from this airport. No trigger was activated. Staffing, they say, was adequate, but the FAA controller that was managing helicopter traffic was also managing some planes taking off and landing. That is typically, at that time of day, 2 jobs, not 1. We also understand a second controller was also doing 2 jobs, not 1. So 2 people doing the jobs of 4 around the time of this accident. That is something the NTSB will look at. Doesn't necessarily mean that was a factor, but it doesn't mean it wasn't. And understanding the workload and the communication coming out of the tower, that will be, both of those will be key parts of this investigation for sure.
Okay, some important context there. Chris Van Cleve, thank you. And we're also now learning more this morning about the impact this crash has had on communities across the country. 14 members of the U.S. figure skating circuit were on board the flight, and now the entire skating community is coming together to mourn their loss. CBS News correspondent Tom Hansen is live this hour in Ashburn, Virginia, with more on this side of the story. Tom, what are you hearing there from people in the skating community where you're at and across the country?
Yeah, Chanel, well, it's definitely a somber mood for yet another day here at the Ashburn Ice House. This was a skating facility where so many elite athletes were coming to train, and it was a very tight-knit community here. So people are just understandably devastated. One girl that we spoke to yesterday, 14 years old, she could barely speak because she was crying so hard. She did manage to tell us that she believes that she lost several of her best friends, in the blink of an eye. So a lot of people here just in utter shock. And when I'm pointing out the victims on the planes, we're talking about, kids as young as 10 years old in some cases, traveling with parents, coaches who have really cultivated these athletes to become the skaters that perform at the highest caliber in their age group. So you're talking about people who are very, very close, and just a community that's devastated. Here's what one person, a young skater, had to say about it.
I love all these people and they really support me. My favorite memory with my coach Ina V was when she created my program that I have right now. And she's just like, I think it's really creative and artistic. I look after those people and they were my inspiration.
It just breaks your heart to hear these young skaters start to mourn and grieve the loss of friends and people that they looked up to. I also want to read you a statement from the Washington Figure Skating Club because there has been some confusion as to who was on the plane, people anxiously awaiting answers on exactly who passed away. They say, "We know that there is much concern and confusion about who was on the flight, and we will share the list once it has been confirmed." So they're taking great care in the flow of information here to make sure that it is accurate and that people are getting to the bottom of just who has been lost. But no doubt a devastating impact on the community as a whole. Chanel.
Heartbreaking, Tom. What more do we know about the other victims here, both from this community and more broadly?
Yeah, well, at 5 o'clock roughly last night, we got a lot more information on some of the people who were being pulled out of the wreckage, which is obviously still an active scene, one that no doubt is being made ever more difficult by the weather conditions today with the rain and the cold. But here's what we can tell you. The victims that we have identified by using our double sourcing. 26-year-old Azra Hussein Raza, she was traveling back to D.C. on a work trip. 46-year-old Alexander Sasha Kirsanov, he was a former figure skating club coach. Kaya Duggins, a civil rights attorney and incoming professor at Howard University School of Law. Casey Crafton, a father of 3 from Salem, Connecticut. Elizabeth Ann Keys, a 33-year-old lawyer from Cincinnati, Ohio. And one of her fellow associates also passed away. And so, there are still a lot of people that have yet to be identified, a lot of suspected flyers who we need to confirm, but that list of the confirmed is certainly growing and will be growing over the coming days, Chanel.
All right, Tom Hansen, thank you. President Donald Trump has now appointed Chris Rushlow to serve as acting FAA administrator in the wake of the nation's deadliest plane crash in nearly a quarter of a century. In a press conference yesterday, the president also suggested without evidence that DEI initiatives could be to blame for the accident. Now I want to bring in CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe for more on this side of the story. Ed, this DEI issue was brought up several times during that news conference yesterday. Will this impact the investigation in any way?
Doesn't sound like it, Chanel, because the Transportation Safety Board officials who will oversee the actual investigation said they essentially heard what the president had said, but reminded all of us that they review a series of things. They review the machinery, they review the specific engines of these aircraft, they're going to review the radar and satellite data, and they review all the people who were involved in it, from the pilots in the planes, the flight attendants on board, the people in the air traffic control tower. So they don't jump to conclusions before an investigation begins, is what they were signaling. And unless or until they see something regarding the people involved, they're not going to jump to conclusions the way the president did.
Got it. Okay, let's talk about the FAA administrator here. Who is Chris Rushlow?
Well, Rushlow's been involved with the FAA now off and on for about 2 decades. This is actually his 3rd stint leading the Aviation Safety Agency, and it speaks to a broader systemic issue that this agency's had. A series of administrators through the years not able to really hold stable political leadership at a key safety agency. He was appointed deputy administrator just last week because the previous administrator quit in late December, or signaled he would, ahead of the Trump inauguration. And that's in part after several months of public disagreement with Elon Musk over how the FAA was overseeing SpaceX. He had fined SpaceX a 6-figure sum for some safety violations. Musk didn't like that, and had essentially been using his platforms to call for his resignation ever since. So he was gone, the number 2 had stepped down, and so you had acting leadership in charge of this key agency when the inauguration happened and the transition really began. It's a good reminder of why across government they really push Democrats, Republicans, and people who've done this before to ensure that you have career professionals who know these places, at least serving as the acting folks, before a president can step in and appoint somebody. And in this case, he's chosen to have Rushlow do so.
And Ed, I want to ask you about some breaking news we're just learning about right now. The CEO of NVIDIA is coming to the White House today for a meeting. Tell us why.
That's right. CBS News has learned that Jensen Huang is meeting with the president today. It is scheduled, we're told, probably for this afternoon. One person familiar with this telling CBS that this meeting was planned weeks ago, has nothing to do with the sudden emergence of DeepSeek, that Chinese AI provider that may, in essence, have lapped everyone else and for a far smaller cost. But essentially it's because Huang has never met the president before, and the White House was eager for them, and NVIDIA was eager for them to meet. So he's had meetings with CEOs of all sorts during the transition and since he became president, and this appears to be part of that. But the timing, obviously, a little suspicious to the tech sector and the business community, given the news about DeepSeek in the last few days.
Okay, a lot of threads to follow there. Ed O'Keefe, thank you. And now let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Tammy Sousa with our first look at our national weather forecast. Hey, Tammy.
Well, hello to you. Yeah, we have a couple things that we're keeping an eye on out there for today. First off, we're going to be looking at rain where there was no rain, and we're going to be looking at well, temperatures warm enough to wash away the snow. Let's start off. Off to the Pacific Northwest, we do have an atmospheric river. We'll cover that a little bit later on. But I want to talk about what's now moving through the deep south and into the northeast. And this is a lot of rain. Now, there is some snow taking place, but that is into parts of New England. So this rain is going to be heavy at times, and it is actually going to wash away a lot of that snow that came down across the deep south. So anything that's left there, they're going to say goodbye to. This is what we're looking at. We're looking at the system lifting off to the north. This is about 5 o'clock tonight. So up and down the I-95 from about 5 to midnight, we're going to be looking at heavy rain. That is going to impact travel. The snow in the northeast will move out of the area. And by tomorrow morning, things should be much quieter. I'll come back in a few minutes. We'll talk about that atmospheric river moving into the Pacific Northwest.
All right, Tammy, thank you very much. An American is among the next group of Hamas hostages set to be released tomorrow under the ceasefire deal with Israel. Details on that planned exchange coming up next. Stay with us. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Welcome back. Some of President Donald Trump's controversial nominees for top government positions were grilled yesterday during their confirmation hearings on Capitol Hill. Kash Patel and Tulsi Gabbard both defended past controversial statements they made, but Gabbard in particular faced tough questions from both Democrats and some Republicans. For more on this, I want to bring in CBS News congressional correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns. Caitlin, good to see you. So Tulsi Gabbard dodging questions about Edward Snowden. Want to ask why this was such a sticking point during the hearing and whether this can actually impact how much support she gets.
Hey, it's great to see you. Yeah, this was a busy day on Capitol Hill. You had this trio of hearings for top Trump officials, or top Trump, what they hope to be top Trump officials. Sorry, I'm hearing an echo in my ear for the control room. So I'm going to turn down my volume for a second. But what was significant here about Tulsi Gabbard is she is up for National Intelligence Director. This is a top position, and she's already on some thin ice with lawmakers. And what was so notable yesterday is a lot of the tough questioning for her actually came from Republicans, and specifically about Edward Snowden. This goes back to a few years ago. She introduced a resolution essentially advocating for a pardoning of Edward Snowden. And what is significant here is that yesterday, when she was pressed several times, not only by Democrats, but also by Republicans, do you think he is a traitor? She really dodged the question. Let's listen to a little bit of an exchange with Michael Bennet, who's a Democratic senator from Colorado.
Is Edward Snowden a traitor to the United States of America? That is not a hard question to answer when the stakes are this high.
Senator, as someone who has
your
served
answer,
in
yes
uniform,
or no, is Edward Snowden a traitor to the United States of America?
as someone who has
I'll go on
worn
to
our
my
uniform.
questions.
So essentially, in that exchange and others, she did say that he broke the law, but she also said that she believed that a lot of the things he elevated led to significant reform. So it's interesting to pay attention to the Republicans on this panel, Chanel, because if she loses a single Republican vote on the Intelligence Committee, that really dooms her chances.
Okay. That's so interesting. Also want to ask Caitlin about Kash Patel, because even though he's Trump's nominee for the FBI, he actually sort of distanced himself from Trump's position on the January 6 rioters. So talk about whether there's a strategy there.
Yeah, this may have come as a surprise to a lot of people who have followed Kash Patel and the way in which he is one of Trump's top allies. I mean, a big reason he was picked for this post is because he has really endeared himself to Donald Trump and the Republican Party base, the MAGA base, and especially in his pitch to completely reform the FBI. I mean, he has said in the past that he wants to get rid of what he calls government tyranny within the FBI. But when it came to this question of the pardons for January 6th offenders, he approached it, at least in that public statement under oath, as someone who would be the leader of the FBI, in other words, being the top cop in this country, and saying, look, I actually don't think that those who committed violent offenses against law enforcement should have their sentences pardoned or even commuted. So that was a notable break with Trump. Everything else, though, he was really, in line with what Trump has been saying. And what's significant here is that he has pretty much unified support among Republicans. He was actually introduced by a Republican senator yesterday. This would be, he's likely to get confirmed here.
Okay, Caitlin Huey-Burns, live for us this hour from Capitol Hill. Thank you. A group representing the families of Israeli hostages held in Gaza has now confirmed the names of 3 more captives set to be released this weekend. The list includes a U.S. Israeli national, Keith Siegel. CBS News reporter Haley Ott is following the latest on this story from Tel Aviv. Haley, what more do we know about this next group of hostages set to be released this weekend?
Good morning. Yes, so we've heard 3 names now from the families of the hostages. They have been briefed by Israeli officials. Keith Siegel is on the list. He is an American, originally from North Carolina. He's 65 years old. Also on the list is Yarden Bibas and Ofer Calderon. You may recognize the name Bibas. Yarden was taken hostage on October 7th, and so was his family, his wife and 2 small children. And there was video that was widely circulated of them being brought into Gaza on October 7th. And they've become a real point of concern here in Israel because obviously of the age of the children, but also because their status hasn't been known, whether or not they're alive or dead. And unfortunately, the fact that Yarden is on the list tomorrow may mean that his family is no longer living. According to the ceasefire deal, children, women, and adults over the age of 50 were supposed to be released first, and then other adults would be released. The fact that Yarden, who isn't in any of those categories, is being released tomorrow may mean that there is no longer anyone alive to be released in those categories, and that would include his family.
And we should mention, Haley, that this is all happening under phase 1 of the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. Where do things stand right now with negotiating a second phase?
This is a 3-part ceasefire deal. We are in phase 1. It's meant to last 42 days. And on day 16 is when negotiations for the second phase are due to have begun by. That is right around the corner. There have been a few moments in the past few weeks where it looks like things could have gone off the rails. They haven't. And I was really curious about where we stood as this point of negotiation, again, between these parties was set to begin again. So I spoke to a former Israeli hostage negotiator who has a lot of experience negotiating with Hamas, Gershon Baskin, and he actually said that it was the United States that was going to play a really big role in what comes next. Take a listen.
I think it's all on the shoulders of Trump. If Trump is determined that this will take place, Netanyahu cannot go against him. Netanyahu may try to create some kind of provocation leading Hamas to breach the ceasefire, in which case Israel will say to the Americans, they breached it, now we have to go back to war. If Trump says yes, then that's the end. If Trump says no, you can't go back to war.
So things are going according to plan. Negotiations are set to take place again soon. But according to this former hostage negotiator, what President Trump says and does in the coming days is going to be really significant for how this plays out. Chanel.
All right, Haley Ott, thank you. And still ahead here on CBS News 24/7, a first-hand look at the wildfire devastation in California and the desperate efforts to salvage belongings and rebuild. Stay with us. You're watching CBS News 24/7. The man who alleges A$AP Rocky shot a handgun at him in 2021 testified that despite his inconsistent story, the rapper did fire the gun and that his memory of the incident has not changed. The man, a former friend of Rocky, who was on the stand during day 2 of the trial in Los Angeles. A$AP Rocky pleaded not guilty to the felony assault charges. He could face up to 25 years in prison if convicted. In Michigan, Jennifer Crumley, the mother of the Oxford High School shooter, is set to face a judge today after her request for a new trial was mostly denied. Her son, Ethan Crumley, is now serving life in prison for killing 4 students at the school in 2021. Both of his parents were found guilty of involuntary manslaughter and face up to 15 years in prison. Jennifer's attorneys are pushing to overturn her sentence, claiming the trial was full of errors. The judge denied most of those motions, but will hear arguments today before issuing a final ruling. In Louisiana, some victims of the New Orleans terror attack are now suing city officials and contractors. The suit claims the deadly truck ramming on New Year's Day was preventable. It accuses law enforcement of failing to protect the revelers on Bourbon Street, and a separate similar lawsuit was also filed earlier this month by another group of victims. Search and recovery efforts resume this morning to find the missing victims. The National Transportation Safety Board says it has found key clues in its investigation. For more on this, I want to bring in CBS News transportation safety expert and analyst Robert Sumwalt. Robert, good to see you. He's also, we should mention, the former chair of the National Transportation Safety Board. And Robert, now that the NTSB has confirmed it has recovered those black boxes, tell us about the process of reviewing that potentially critical evidence.
Yeah, well, good morning. And I can start out by telling you what it's like to audition a cockpit voice recorder. I did it before. And so they gather the various parties, the FAA, the airline, the DOD will be a part of it. And all of these relevant players will sit around a table and they'll play the tape. And as they're playing it, somebody will be typing out what they're hearing. If they don't understand what something was said, they will back it up, play it again. So they create a written transcript of the audio portion of the tape.
I also want to ask you, Robert, about what's happening on the ground and in the water right now in terms of collecting and analyzing such a huge volume of wreckage. I imagine the focus right now is just retrieval.
You're right. It is retrieval at this point. And to be honest with you, the the NTSB is not really analyzing anything at this point. They are collecting the perishable evidence, the evidence that can go away with the passage of time. That's their main focus right now. The analysis phase will come later.
Robert, the White House is also pushing for a pretty speedy investigation. I just wonder if that kind of pressure could impact this process at all.
Well, it's certainly something to keep in mind. One of the NTSB's values is independence, and that's independence to make sure that they have the freedom to conduct the investigation the way that it needs to be done. I was with the NTSB for 15 years. Great people, great organization. They will do a very good job, but they need the time and the resources to do the job properly.
Robert Sumwalt, thanks so much for your time and perspective. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
A Boston community is now mourning the loss of 6 members of its ice skating community to that D.C. plane crash. The club CEO says the Skating Club of Boston isn't just a training facility, but also a second family for its members. For more on this side of the story, I want to bring in CBS News Boston reporter Laura Hafili, who is right inside that skating club rink this morning. Laura, tell us about what you're hearing from family and friends of those victims there today.
Well, obviously, family, friends, and members of this skating club are devastated after losing 6 members of their skating family. But competitors are back on the ice this morning, and that's in part because these skaters are at the height of their competition season. There are several contests happening in the next few weeks and months, including a trip to South Korea and the World Figure Skating Championships being held here at TD Garden in Boston. So it's a really heavy atmosphere. We watched a synchronized team practice this morning. There are some pairs and individual skaters practicing behind me. And again, the atmosphere is incredibly heavy, incredibly solemn. There are flowers laid out downstairs with pictures of the skaters and their family members that we lost. Of course, also those 2 coaches that the club lost. So really a lot of sadness here today. But one thing I'm hearing from a lot of the members of this organization is they will persevere with these 6 members of their skating family, of course, close to their heart.
What do we know about the victims here and the legacy that they'll leave behind?
Well, I want to start with the 2 coaches. They learned how to skate and grew up in St. Petersburg, Russia. They were champions in their own right in 1994, and then they came here to lend their experience as coaches, and they really were a pivotal part of this club. One thing members of this organization tell me is that they really were leaders, and when you lose coaches like this, it puts the future of skating at risk. And all of the skaters here just have nothing but good things to say about those coaches. Now, in terms of the skaters themselves, Spencer Lane and his mother died in this accident. Spencer was an amazing skater. He was a rising star, and he was young in the sport. He had just been doing it for a few years, but the CEO of the club tells me he was learning and growing incredibly quickly. As for Gina Hahn, we lost her as well. She was a rising star in her own right. So a lot of really good memories with both of these young people. Again, heavy hearts here today at the Skating Club of Boston.
Laura, thank you. And heading now to the other side of the country, with the California wildfires finally under control, the attention now turns to rebuilding. So many people lost everything. Our very own Carter Evans lives in the Palisades fire zone. His home thankfully survived, but many others, as we know, did not. He gives us a first-hand look at all the destruction as some residents are now looking to rebuild.
Everywhere you look, there is just so much destruction. That was a thriving neighborhood there. Block after block after block after block, it's all gone. This was a little strip mall, and it was special to my family because my daughter, when she went to elementary school right up the street, the 5th graders, every Friday, they'd come here to the little convenience store and they'd get sodas and candy, and it was their first little taste of freedom. And now there's nothing. There was the Italian restaurant right up the street. The only thing that's left there now is their sign celebrating 40 years in this community. Same with the pharmacy that was right here. It was a small business. They told my wife they didn't own the property here. They don't know what the landlord is going to do. Their business is gone. And I think that that's something else that's important to think about in this community. It wasn't just the homeowners that made it what it was. It was these small businesses as well. And we don't know if they'll ever be back.
Such a powerful account from our Carter Evans. Thank you so much for that report. Now let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Tammy Sousa with another check on our national weather forecast. Hey, Tammy.
Well, hello. Yeah, we're going to go to the Pacific Northwest and the West Coast. We're going to check out what is going on right now as far as rain, because that is all that they want. They want to have just the rain coming down. They have a system on the East Coast, and that's bringing heavy rain. But what we have now is an atmospheric river that is beginning to make its way into the Pacific Northwest. And typically, once it's there, it kind of leans in after a few days into Southern California. Looks like it's going to stay here, though, probably at least through the beginning of the week, giving them some much-needed rain and snow before it heads to Southern California. And of course, there is that big concern always that there's going to be too much rain, and that is going to cause for mudslides and things like that, because we've already seen that with lesser amounts of rain. This is a look at that atmospheric river. So let's walk through what's going to happen. Heavy snow in the Sierras. That's kind of nice. Great for the ski resorts. Great to get the snowpack in there. We go all the way into tomorrow. You can see that rain that is beginning to lean in Northern California, and it is heavy rain that is coming down. Snow still continuing in the Sierras and into the Intermountain West, and pockets of heavy rain now making their way into San Francisco. And this is by the time that we get into Sunday, and then we continue into Monday. But you notice this whole line is beginning to approach Central and Southern California, and it will eventually lean in and bring them several days of rain as we go through Southern California. So that is something we'll be watching. Yes, the rain would be nice. No, the flooding would be very bad. And you can see some places picking up several inches, even up into Northern California, places like Redding, looking at perhaps 3 to 4 inches of rain. So we will have some downpours. And this, again, is before it even leans in to Southern California. So they'll be watching closely there. It'll help with any wildfires, but it may actually hurt with all of the mudslides and debris. Back over to you.
All right, we appreciate the update, Tammy. Thank you. And much more news straight ahead. Stay with us. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. All right, welcome back. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is headed to the Panama Canal as part of his first international trip in this role. President Donald Trump made it clear he wants the U.S. to control the heavily used Panama Canal, a move the Panamanian government strongly opposes. CBS News correspondent Lilia Luciano is there in Panama this hour. She's on a boat tour and joins us live from this canal. Tell us a bit about what you're seeing and hearing there today.
Well, Chanel, I've been here for several days working on a story about the Panama Canal, about the relationship with the United States. And look, one of the things that I've found most interesting, yesterday I was in a press conference with the president of Panama, who had been very tight-lipped about the relationship with the United States, about his feelings and his thoughts and everything having to do with the canal, only saying things like the Panama Canal is and will remain Panama's. But yesterday at the press conference, he went into greater detail. I asked him, specifically, why is it in the U.S.'s interest to keep the Panama Canal in Panama's hands? And there are geopolitical reasons for this. There are, of course, reasons of respecting Panama's sovereignty. But he, specifically said, look, it's not about whether it's in the U.S.'s interest. The Panama Canal is ours. I have been talking to a lot of Panamanians who say that it's not just a pride and a sense of identity that this canal, where we are, brings to them, that despite it being built financed to be built by the United States over 100 years ago, that it is a part of their land, that it employs more than 9,000 people. Panamanians, when the Panama Canal was in the hands of the United States, when the U.S. owned it, were not really allowed into many areas within the canal zone. Now, 100% of the people who work in the Panama Canal, which represents 5% of all global trade, which, the U.S. is its main user. 100% of the people who work in the canal are Panamanians. So and it generates a revenue of about $5 billion a year. A lot of that goes into the Panamanian government. And when you walk around Panama, you realize that this is a place that is incredibly, well-developed, Panama City, that it's a place that, that Panamanians take a lot of pride into what the canal brings to them. There's also being here. I want to, be very specific because there's a lot of confusion. People think that because there is a Hong Kong-based company that owns a couple of ports on the Atlantic Ocean side and on the Pacific Ocean side of the canal, that they somehow control the canal, which is what President Trump has been saying. The canal is owned by an authority that belongs to the Panamanian government, but that is independent of whatever administration is in place. And so it's, they are the ones who charge the fees. Yesterday, we saw a large vessel that pays around $1 million just to traverse the canal. And those funds go not to the companies that own the ports. They don't necessarily even have to use the ports. The ports are one thing. Another very different thing is traversing the canal. And so this is a huge part of the Panamanian economy and a huge part of the U.S. economy, of course, as well, with 40% of container shipping going to the United States traversing through here. So there's a great sense of pride, but there's also, from the part of the president, what he was telling us yesterday is, look, the United States needs to see that we are such a strong partner, such a strong ally, especially in the matters that matter most to U.S. voters who chose and elected Donald Trump as president, migration. Migration has dropped significantly, more than 40% compared between 2023 and 2024 through the Darien Gap. This government, with the assistance of the United States, with funding from the U.S., is repatriating people to countries like Colombia and Ecuador. And the president stressed that migration through the Darien has dropped by tenfold, according to the numbers he shared yesterday. And so this is an effort that is top priority for him, and it's what he wants to show Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who will be here this weekend, and say, look, I'm an important ally. Don't mess with the canal.
Lots to follow there. Okay, Lilia Luciano live for us from Panama this hour. Thank you. Well, the Grammys are just around the corner. We'll preview all the glitz and glam and tell you about the top picks slated to take home the night's biggest awards. Stay with us. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. The tragic Midair collision is undoubtedly raising questions and concerns among travelers. Americans are flying in record numbers, and while the system has a pretty great safety record, it is clearly under stress. CBS News senior national correspondent Mark Strassman has a closer look at how the industry is responding.
We all know planes are crowded. Our skies are too. This is a snapshot of today's U.S. air traffic on FlightRadar24.com. On average, 45,000 planes are en route somewhere every day. This icon represents American Airlines Flight 5342 approaching Washington last night. At what appears to be the moment of midair impact, it freezes over the Potomac River, then disappears from the screen, shattering much of the flying public's sense of safety.
It alerted me a lot more and made my nerves a little bit more on edge.
Given that congestion in the skies, U.S. Aviation has a remarkable safety record.
It is safer to get on an airplane and go coast to coast at 30,000 feet and 600 miles an hour than it is to drive yourself to the airport at 60 miles an hour with 4 wheels on the ground.
Kit Darby is a retired commercial and military pilot who now consults for businesses hiring pilots. He has flown in and out of Washington's Reagan National Airport for years.
You've got to hit your spot. You've got to do a good job of being a pilot to fly successfully to that airport.
Trickier than most.
Far trickier than most.
Not since this disaster in Buffalo in 2009 has America seen a major commercial plane crash. That's nearly 16 years, the longest streak in U.S. aviation history. 50 people were killed. Since that crash in Buffalo, our aviation system has grown more stressed, more tested every day. Increased flights, air traffic controller staffing issues, climate change, worsening weather, and more objects to avoid in the sky, including private planes and drones. Washington's Reagan National Airport, designed to service 15 million passengers a year, now processes more than 26 million. And it's one of 3 U.S. airports, along with New York's JFK and LaGuardia, relying on runway slots to limit air traffic. The FAA considers those airports capacity constrained. How much of it is reliant on humans getting it right?
Well, everything's gotten better fast. People, however, remain an issue. Seeing, hearing, understanding, depth perception, all those factors are key, and they haven't gotten better as fast as the mechanical things have gotten.
Another measure of a stressed system. Over the last 20 years, Reagan National Airport has reported at least 9 near midair collisions. For Eye on America, Mark Strassman in Atlanta.
Well, the 67th annual Grammy Awards happened this Sunday as some of the top artists in the music industry hope to take home an award. CBS News correspondent Danya Backus has more from Los Angeles.
It's set to be a showdown at music's biggest night. The Queen Bee, Beyonce, leads with 11 nominations, though she holds the record for most Grammys won by any artist. Sunday, for the 5th time, she'll compete for a Grammy she's never won, Album of the Year.
I mean, we say every year this could be the year for Beyonce.
Jim Aswad is Variety's executive music editor.
For a record like this to win, I almost feel like it would be more on the merits of Beyonce deserving it and who Beyonce is as an artist.
To win, she'll have to beat fellow Grammy history maker Taylor Swift, plus other top nominated artists like Sabrina Carpenter, Charli XCX, Billie Eilish, and Chappell Roan.
I think Charli XCX is going to get a lot of awards. She may not get some of the top ones. We've been saying around the office it's possible that Chappell Roan could sweep. You know, she has that level of popularity and cultural influence.
The Grammy Award show is hitting a different note this year. In light of the devastating wildfires in Los Angeles, the show will honor first responders and raise money for wildfire relief efforts.
And really try and make this night for good. Raise money, which we're going to do for 3 local causes. Celebrate these firefighters and make sure that they are seen as the true heroes in the room rather than the musical heroes that are sat on the tables.
Executive producer Ben Winston says we can expect non-stop musical performances, including special tributes featuring Cynthia Erivo, Chris Martin, John Legend, and Sheryl Crow.
And then we've got a few big surprises of some megastars that are going to be performing that I'm really excited about.
Benson Boone, Shakira, and Teddy Swims are just a few of the other artists scheduled to perform. Trevor Noah returns as the host. Danya Backus, CBS News, Los Angeles.
It's going to be a good one. And reminder, you can watch the red carpet for the 67th annual Grammy Awards on CBSNews.com and CBS News Los Angeles. You can also watch the Grammy Awards this Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific on CBS and streaming on Paramount+. All right, let's go back to CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Tammy Sousa with our last look at our national weather forecast. What are you tracking there this hour?
I'm tracking warmth. I think we're going to have a nice warm up for much of the country. Going to be out of that deep freeze, and that is exactly what we want. So you can see the shades of yellow. That's the warmth coming up through Central America, South America, even into the tip of Florida. But look at it pushing further north. That pink, which was our Arctic outbreak, that's going away rapidly. So we're going to be enjoying warm temperatures, kind of up and down. I would say average to warm is what we're going to be looking at as we move ahead. This is a look at what you can expect out there today. The warmth, of course, in Florida. But as you head up the East Coast, we're looking at temperatures that are seasonable. In the 40s as we get up toward New York. Charlotte in the 70s. We're looking at rain up and down the eastern seaboard for today, though. Let's go to the heartland where we are looking at temperatures in the 40s. Look at that. We're going to get up into Minnesota, even up into parts of Montana. We're in the 40s. Southern California, comfortable in the 60s.
All right, Tammy, thank you so much. And that does it for us this hour. Stay right where you are after the break. Elizabeth Cook is live from San Francisco with all the breaking news from coast to coast. This is CBS News 24/7.